Welcome back, legends, to another episode of Chasing Better with Noxie, the only podcast you ever need to listen to from now on in. If you haven't checked out our previous episode with a Nova Peris Olympian champion, politician, super mum, she's done it all. Go and check it out on the YouTube channel, guys. It's on all my socials. If you need a link, obviously hit me up and I will get it to you ASAP. It was an incredible story to dive into that last week. And she is back for another awesome story. And today we're going to be diving into Kokoda. Now, this was a massive journey that she undertook. How long ago?
In September, October of last year.
Perfect. Cool. So within the last 12 months, she's gone on the journey of a lifetime and she's looking at going again. Which is very cool. And the idea is that she's hoping to bring more people, even myself, which would be very exciting if I can get that to line up. So that's very cool. So I'm looking into that. But the idea today is we want to look at discipline and also the power of what your brain will actually allow the body to do. Now, I've said this many times in content pieces across the last couple of years that, I'm a big fan of the Matrix. The body will follow where the mind leads. Morpheus, I think in the Matrix says, the body cannot live without the mind. So if you are strong in mind, you can be very strong and powerful in body. But the body cannot go anywhere if that mind's not leading it in the right direction. I'm a big believer of that. And I use that all the time with my clients, and that's why they get results. But yeah, so again, diving into it today, obviously we'll look at, let's get some stats wise. So give us a rundown over on like, how long is the journey? Now it's usually a set time to get it completed. Yes.
Yeah. So, where we started from, Kokoda Station right up to Owen's Corner. So that was it's really an 8-day trek, because the last day, day 9, is only 5 kilometers.
Yep.
And it took, I think, about 125 kilometers over eight days of trekking.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And it's not just your straight line trekking, it's up and over and down, up, over. So it's a phenomenal trek, and something that I've, never even come close to experiencing on multiple levels of physical, mentally, spiritually, all that sort of stuff. I've never experienced anything like that ever in my lifetime. So yeah, one incredible experience.
So to put that into perspective for the everyday Joe that's sitting at home going, why on earth would you do that? To give them some volume and kind of shape so they can kind of visualize it themselves. Not only are you walking through the jungles of Papua New Guinea, it's literally, there's sections where, because my dad went through this experience as well before he passed. He was very lucky to do that because his grandfather had fought in the war with Kokoda and all that sort of stuff. And something crazy that Dad always mentioned to me was that he couldn't believe how he was able to just walk uphill. And like there were some sections where you're literally like on hands, knees, feet, whatever you can to get to that next, checkpoint or that tree over there or whatever your mind had to do to get you to that next, stop point, And I suppose, how many kind of kilometers would you be averaging? It'd be like what, 10, maybe 15 a day, roughly?
Well,
give or
yeah,
take?
I think the least amount of kilometers we did, well, barring the last day, which was only 5 kilometers, and you're up at 4 a.m. to reach the peak by sunrise. On average, it's about 15 kilometers. So the least you sort of did in one day was 11 or 12 kilometers, but the most I ever did was 21 kilometers, which was 11 hours of trekking.
Yeah, right. Cool.
And
very cool.
Yeah.
And to give them an idea of the terrain, now we're talking like some of the thickest rainforest on earth, right? Like, and rainforest doesn't just mean nice level ground. It means mud, it means slippery, it means there's trees that are this far apart, there's trees that are, full, kind of walking path apart, I'm assuming. What's it like experiencing that? Because I mean, you've obviously done track and field where you've got set out lanes, everything's all regimented. Like, how was that on your brain, coming from that athlete mindset of, everything's kind of set out already for you, whereas this was kind of like an unknown experience, I suppose, every step of the way, probably at some point.
Yeah, I guess for myself going in to do it, and we sort of touched on it last. I mean, the reason I did it, your grandfather is my great grandfather, and I had never met him, but obviously some of my family had before he passed.
Mm-hmm.
There was a part of my history that was intriguing to me, and I'd had quite a bit to do with Auntie Gwen, your auntie,
Mm-hmm.
and she knew the family history well. So I was like, you know what, a lot of people know my Aboriginal side of my history and where I hail from, the Kimberleys and the Western Arnhem Land region. So I did my DNA test a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh my God, how the hell am I 27% Scottish? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 27% Scottish and 12% Irish. I was like, holy shit.
Have you bought a kilt yet?
I've got something very similar. And it was, okay, there's part of this history. And then, so I dived into it, and I was like, oh my God, because I often always talk about strength and resilience coming from my Aboriginal heritage, but knowing the history of, your grandfather, this amazing man, Jack Knox, who had enlisted in the war and had gone to, the Syria war, then he'd come back to Australia, then gone to the front. I think he landed on the 12th of August, if my memory serves me correctly, 1942, and then was straight into battle. And so for me going there, it was like a part of my bloodline has been there. So I was going in to walk those footsteps. So in terms of me being this control freak athlete, where in track and field and hockey, you're in a controllable situation, so you can push yourself knowing that you're going to go to a warm bed after, or an ice bath or a hot bath, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So knowing the history of this country is, we have our freedoms because of that war, and I didn't really know much about it. So I was like, I can't go and say I'm this Aussie ambassador without knowing another big part of our history. So going in there, so I did it by myself in terms of I didn't know anyone in my group except for Aidan, who was this Grimes, is this Irish fella who's done it like 120 times, and he knows the history. He's, Jack Knox was a part of the 2nd 16th Battalion, and so I had read up on, and Auntie Gwen had given me history, so I had that history element, but I was going into an unfamiliar place where I had to train my ass off for it. It was 4 months of really hard work, because you never want to go in underprepared, because the physical element is like nothing I've ever experienced before. The spiritual element of for such areas which were so beautiful, there was blood there before, and people lost their lives. They gave their freedom for our freedom. So there was all these things that was just going on, and so I had to allow myself to know that to reach the end, it was a process. It was one step in front of the other, and like what you're saying, 1 minute you're climbing up a hill which is so steep, then going down it, and I would never have made it if it wasn't for the 2 Papua New Guinean guys that walked with me, that carried my 17-kilo backpack, and Jono. It was just phenomenal. Some of them don't wear shoes. He had a pair of thongs on, and here am I trying to be fully equipped. And he saved me that many times. And, you're there, you're just reliant upon them, and knowing that history that we shared with the Papua New Guinean, the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. I had to trust them, trust people who I'd never met before. So that was another element of the mental side of things, and like you said, that there was a track, whereas in an athletics track, what is it, over 1 meter wide? It's a single lane track. And there were times when I'd look around and think, oh my God, I'm the only person on this track, because Jono and Wagi were 50 meters behind me, and they wanted me to experience part of it just for me. And And I actually carried, you know, your grandfather's Bible. I had it all. Protect Auntie Gwen loaned it to me, and I carried that. So there were times when I was talking to myself, but to, you know, your grandfather, my great grandfather, just asking him to just keep pushing me, because there were times when your legs just cramped up and they just didn't want to move. But it's just like, what the hell are you fucking whinging for? You know, there were people that they gave their lives for our freedom, and it was just a phenomenal experience. But what it allowed me to understand is how strong the human mind is, to be able to push through things when it hurt, push through the spiritual element, push through, just have to keep on going and going. And you can't even imagine what those soldiers went through. So there's a part of me that is like, oh my God, this Irish Scottish man that I never knew that I have a DNA connection was just mind-boggling. That you can just tap into the strength and resilience, I suppose, that we all do have as human beings.
Oh, fantastic. And it's like, I get chills just hearing those extracts, right? And we haven't even gone into details yet. And you know, I've had a couple of chats with Auntie Gwen as well. Like, we know, anyone that knows her, she's a mad historian. She's artsy as hell. So she always puts a bit of a comedy spell on everything, which is fantastic. But I think when it comes to like preparation, like, you know, you mentioned 4 months worth of prep work for it. Now, I still have memories of when Dad was prepping for it. Now, he used to do, because he was in the Army Reserves, you know, up until he was like 58 when he got diagnosed. So he would always do like a 5K, either walk or pack walk every weekend, pretty much every Saturday if he could, if we didn't have family shit on. And so like, he was fairly strong in the legs, but even he started to realize, like, I still remember, I think he got like a little package or something that came through, and it was like, these were some specific training protocols that he had to try and add into his week as preparation. And I'm sure you probably got that as well, so that you were prepared as best as you could. I mean, you're never going to be perfectly prepared, we know that, but you can get pretty bloody close. So what kind of, just out of interest, what sort of stuff did you have to do or add into your routine? Because I know you obviously train regularly normally anyway. So like, what sort of stuff did you have to change much, or was it adding just weight and carrying load, or what was the go?
Yeah, the last 7 to 8 weeks is where you really step it up. Like 4 months out, I would hang on a sec. I've got to let my dog out. Wait there.
Yep. That's right.
So 4 months out, I go, the gym that I go to was the F45. So it's just high intensity work. It's not really focusing on any particular sort of muscle group. It's just high intensity workout. So I enjoy it, you know, at my ripe old age. So what I did do with the training for Kokoda, and nothing can really ever prepare you. There's no terrain, I don't think, well, nothing here in Darwin that ever even tries to, you know, stimulate what you experience there. So for me, it was walking. I'd get about 40 kilometers in a week on average. It was just, and then building the increments up of carrying a weighted vest. And then the last 6 to 8 weeks, I was carrying a maximum of 8 to 10 kilos, and getting about 60 to 70 kilometers in a week.
You're right.
And so that was walking in the mornings, whether it's 5 o'clock, a 5K in the morning, 5K in the afternoon, 15Ks on a Saturday or a Sunday. And so that, I really ramped that up the last 6 to 8 weeks, and did a lot of sort of walking. There was one lot of staircase here in Darwin. It's about 150 meters long. So it's not long, but it's covered in sort of the canopy of trees, and it's the humidity's through the roof. So I used to do about 3 kilometers of just staircase walking, up, down, up, down, up, down. And so I'd also spoken to a couple of people who had done Kokoda previously, and they were like, you'll be right, because you're mentally tough and all the rest of it. But even still, it's going into unknown territory, and you are surrendering your own ability to control anything, to be able to take everything in. And I think that's what I sort of took and what Aiden taught me. He said, Nova, don't try and beat any mountain. You've just got to allow the mountain to control you. You just take it all in. And yeah, so the training side of things, I mean, I worked a lot on like walking up the hill and down the hill because I've got the old hockey knees. And so they're not the best of knees, they're the old girl knees. And so even like having blood tests, what I found was even in one of my blood tests that my iron was low. And that
very common in ladies these days.
Yep. And so I had to pump that up. And there was a part of me which showed in the blood test that my, whatever it is, my platelets, like if I was to cut myself over in Kokoda, I didn't have the right type of platelets or whatever the measurement is to stop the bleed. So I had to stop taking a particular, like any sort of, like anti-inflammatory. So that was a no-go for 4 weeks out, because I was like, oh my God, that if I stop doing that, my body's going to kick in and whatever. And the other one was my electrolytes was so significantly low because when I was training up here, I was just drinking water and I was having so much water and not enough electrolytes. And so I'm so glad. So even in terms of the preparation, it's the physical sort of training, the mental side of things. I thought, okay, I knew that I could be okay with that because I, had other things where I'd prepared myself, but just getting the body right in terms of having those blood tests. So if I hadn't have known that my electrolytes were so low, so I had to introduce them before I went, because a lot of people, there's a thing that if you drink too much water, people have died doing Kokoda because they've actually had too much water.
Okay, interesting.
The sweat, that it's all out. So you got to balance that with your electrolytes.
So that's a tip for those playing at home. If your hydration is rubbish, a lot of the time you're actually low in salt. And that's another common conversation I have with my clients, especially once they start adding in regular sweaty training. So they're under load, they're under tension. So obviously we do a lot of weightlifting, but even like guys and girls that do long steady state cardio, so any of you bike riding, running over long distance, marathon, all that sort of stuff, park runs every Saturday, right? Like a common thing is you are low in salt. There's a big fear around salt because a lot of people are like, oh, heart health and stuff like that, but you still need salt and minerals, so whether it's your magnesiums and stuff like that on a daily basis. So just a word of warning there, and that's just for everyday use as well, guys. So you can see how important it is in something like a big challenge like Kokoda.
So that's what I found, and it was just interesting because I would never have really thought about that, because you could be the physical side of things good, the mental side of things, but we don't actually know what's going on in our body. And having those blood tests, lots of blood tests, and then I had a blood test just 2 weeks before I was due to leave, and my doctor's like, you're good to go. So and it was good, my electrolytes were good, the sodium, everything. I was like, oh my God, that's just what I needed to know, because it's a big preparation and a commitment, and when you do Kokoda, you just want to enjoy that experience as best as you
want
can.
To be present, right? You want to be able to take part in it.
Present in it. And because when I was there, Andrew, there were a couple of, 4 people that got airlifted out. And there were some very old people that thought that they could do it, and that lasted 2 days. And you sort of, when you're on the trek, you hear about these things and you see helicopters coming in and taking people out. So I guess the experience that I had was just, something that was just a most phenomenal thing. And I actually blogged my day-to-day trek on my Facebook. So for any of your listeners, you can head to my Facebook and check out my blogs.
There's some pretty raw accounts there, guys. So it's definitely worth checking out, because again, this is stuff that just gets poured straight out of your head. There's no hours of thinking. It's kind of like, this happened today and this is how it felt, and you're just like, it's just raw, and it's really cool to read. So no, that's fantastic. I suppose in terms of preparation as well, like was there any recommendations on mental preparation? I never actually got a chance to kind of discuss this with Dad, but did you have any discussions prior to going that involved any sort of mental preparation at all?
I'd watched a lot of documentaries on Kokoda.
Yeah. Okay.
So I learned about the 39th Battalion and watched that, even though it wasn't 100% accurate of the events, but it took you to 80% of the accuracy of it. So then I'd read sort of just other blogs of other people who had sort of done it before. And so, I mean, they're all things to make you understand the broader picture and the environment, I suppose. And you know, knowing Jack Knox's history, the mention in the dispatches which I'd read, and he was also in the book, you know, 1,000 Good Men at War. So I'd sort of read that as well. So I'd sort of put myself, and as best as I possibly could, mentally prepared myself, but I also had to mentally prepare myself that to expect the unexpected, you know. And that was something that I learned from sport, is that, you know, you've got to be prepared for a shit ton of unexpected things, you know. Like,
have you got any way of kind of like, how would you prep for that? Like, the fear of the unknown is a very common thing for pretty much everyone on the face of the earth, of you know, waking up every day, fuck, plane could fall out of the sky. Like, there's always that fear of what's going to happen today, like what ifs. Like, how do you find you prep for that, so that you're like, cool, okay, that's a challenging moment, but how can I approach it so I don't just crumble in a heap every day? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess, well, in June of last year, I went off on a 10-day silent retreat and did Vipassana. I don't know if you've heard that before.
No,
Vipassana.
I haven't. No.
Yeah.
Do tell.
So it's 10 days where you don't talk to anyone and you meditate for 10 hours a day. So you're up at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's just full on meditation. You eat vegetarian food. You don't listen, you can't read, and it's just you and your head. So it's a pretty full on thing. And what I learned from that, and even in my sporting heydays, I've pushed my body to the extreme, but my mind had never been, I called it the wild elephant. So in my head, I had this wild bull elephant that was so strong, but I really didn't know how to tame this wild elephant at times. And so doing this Vipassana, where you're meditating for 10 hours a day and you're sitting and you're still, and it's an old form of Buddhism meditation. So although it's not a religion, it's just you and your mind, and it's just the teachings of how you can sit and be still and quiet and be able to understand sensations in your body. So getting to what you're saying, how did I also prepare for it? It's just like I'd come from it was the fear of the unknown, which I had to overcome. Like being this control freak of knowing people, and I had to let all that go and know that there was a purpose for me to do this, and I trained for this purpose. So I just had to allow and embrace anything and everything. Like, there were times at night when it was so fucking cold and no one was going to give up a sleeping bag or an extra layer of clothes, because you only take 2 layers of clothes, what you walk in and what you sleep in at night. And any recommendations? You take a fresh pair of socks and a fresh pair of undies, because they are the greatest things that you can have every day.
I can imagine.
But then, you know, you wake up and you're having Wheat Bix with powdered milk and a cup of tea or coffee, and then 2-minute noodles for lunch, and then for dinner it was just rice and a tin of tuna, and that was it for 10 days when you're on the track. And you can't complain. You know, you're there to walk in the footsteps of, like I said, those who gave the freedom. So you have to mentally prepare yourself to say, you're not going to go there and fucking whinge. You just have to go there, and you're there for a purpose. You want to try and understand as best as you could those who gave their freedoms for our freedoms, and you have to go there with that mindset.
Was there any did you change your food beforehand before you left? Had you started changing your diet at all?
I went into having like a lot of carbs just before, and I'm not a carb person. I like to have my lean proteins and heaps of vegetables and salad. So I sort of kept all that going. And then when I sort of went to did Kokoda, that's all you're sort of subjected to, and you sort of found between the end of it, your tummy's not the best, because I towards the back end, the last 5 days, having Panadols and some painkillers for my knees is what I had to take at nighttime to get me through the next day, and that sort of clogs your belly up. So when you're recovering, it actually took me 2 to 3 weeks before the throbbing in my legs stopped. So I'd be walking at times and sometimes my leg would give way. So that just sort of, I guess, puts it into perspective of, you know, but I was 51 when I did it. Always sort of kept myself relatively fit. My mind was okay. I could push myself, but by God, it's just something you can never really prepare yourself. And I remember on day 3, I think it was, I said to Jono and to Wuggy, the 2 Papua New Guinean men that, you know, walked with me, I was like, Jono, how far? He's like, not long now. Okay. So I'm thinking, okay, not long. And I'd say to Wuggy, how much longer? Maybe 4 or 5 kilometers? Yes, 4 or 5 kilometers. Then you get there, and I had battery life before my watch carked it. And then I thought to myself, you're just an idiot, Nova. What? You're asking these men how far something, and neither one of them has a fucking watch. They don't understand. They're just followed by the sun.
Just looking at the position of the sun. We've got about 3.78 kilometers to go. Yeah.
It's totally irrelevant. And it was just, So I had a bit of a cackle to myself, and just, you know, you wanted to sort of give yourself an uppercut for asking the questions. But towards the end, it was funny because they'd say, oh, not long to go. I'm like, how long is not long?
Did
7
you,
kilometers.
as part of that, do you find that was like the first time you realized, shit, I need to just shut up and just be present?
Yeah.
Do you think that was, because again, we get so used to, we'll just check on Google Maps and see how far it is, right? I've got 12 and a half minutes left, 18 kilometers, whatever. Like there's always a number attached to something. So you're constantly like, you know, like this. And I think you miss a lot of stuff, right? I liken it to, I live in Mandurah, which is, you know, 45 to an hour to Perth. And Beck, my lovely wife, her family lives up in Canning Vale, which is up in Perth. So like we'll often head up on weekends and stuff. And I hate the drive, because you're on the freeway, it's one straight line, there's like 2 main corners in it, that's about it, and the rest of it is just driving in a fucking straight line. And you start to realize how autopilot that trip is, right? It's so you chuck the GPS on, but because you've driven it so many times, you don't even need it anymore, right? But like if you need to check, you can always go, okay, cool, we're 10 minutes away, we're 12 minutes away, whatever. So I suppose for you, like that sounds like it was that kind of that moment of realization where you're just like, just shut up and walk. Like you've only got finite energy in your body to use every day. So stop using it on thinking about the dumb shit that doesn't actually mean anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like that, because for every step I took, that was the only thing that mattered at that time, because you're walking over roots from trees, there's holes, there's ditches, and it's wet and it's slippery. And a few times there was actually one time I was walking over this creek bed, and I don't even know why. I look back on it now, like Waggy and Jono was sitting down, and I just got up to walk over, and I fell and I slipped. And the way I slipped, I actually could have smashed my elbow in and smashed my head. And I don't even know how that didn't happen. And the both men just looked at me as if to say, oh my God, why would you do that? You know, and this was on day 5. So even like they came running over to make sure I was okay. And I was okay. But it just goes to show that I went from sitting down in a total, what you'd call a safe environment, and took 2 steps, which could have ended pretty bad, you know, blood and broken arm and smashed head. And I don't know how I landed so well. I don't know to this day. Maybe some spirit just looked after me there, but that is the type of terrain that you're in. And what it says is that you just have to think about every moment in the environment that you're in. And, you know, like one thing that I actually did love about doing it was you're off grid to no internet. There's no phone service. Actually, I lie. There's 2 little parts of the place where there is a bit of phone service, and you're lucky you have to walk around and you find it. And I rang almost everyone I could think about that morning, and no one had answered the phone. I was like, oh, no one to talk to me. Maybe that's a sign, but I eventually got hold of my daughter. So that was nice. But I guess you're off grid and you're just taking in every bit of environment around you. And there were places where it was just, it was beautiful, but you know, underneath that beauty was just, you know, the lives lost and the blood that was spilled, you know, and you sort of, you're thinking about that all the time. So
what did they how did they kind of, because obviously they would have done a fair bit of storytelling and things like that along the way, like how was that kind of implemented into the journey? Because obviously like your brain's going a million miles a second going, which foot is stepping next, don't step on that tree branch, don't slip there. And then like how did they bring the storytelling in? Was it kind of you'd stop at the end of the day and they'd tell you about the day, or they'd tell you beforehand or along the way?
Yeah, no, how they did it was because the group that I was in, everyone had their own different levels of walking, and I just walked slow because the uphills were fine, and even though it was so physically hard, it was just the downhill impact on my knees, which was really hard.
Yep.
And so by the time you got to the village where you camped for the night, everyone just sort of wanted to sort of just chill, or they'd find a river and you go and sort of sit in the river that it was icy cold, and you'd eat, and then there'd be maybe 45 minutes of sunlight left, and you'd be around a fire. Then you're actually in your tent by 7 o'clock at night.
Yep.
Because you're up at 4 a.m. the next day. So what happens is in the next morning is Aidan would bring us all in together, and we actually had memorabilia. So there was like a replica Southern Cross medal and some other medals, and there were some servicemen who actually donated their medals to Aidan, and so we carried them on our trek. And then with our colleagues who he walked with, you know, there was an elderly fella, and you know, he was the epitome of courage and strength and endurance. And so you can be emotional just saying a few nice words about your comrades that you're sort of walking the trek with. But so we do that, and then Aidan would tell us about where we were, and so he'd set the scene for the day to say, okay, this is, you know, the battlefields of this and what took place. And I got my notes here. For me, the most incredible day was day 6. And that was from Brigade Hill to Naoro, I think I pronounced that right. And that was a hectic 21 kilometers, and that took 11 hours to trek. And it was that morning that where we were standing around this little, it was like a, what do you call it? Like a plaque. And it was put there for the Australians who lost their lives. And so Aidan sets the scene. And as he was talking to us on dawn, across the hills where a lot of lives were lost, the sun was rising, and actually looked like the rising sun badge. And I looked, and it was just phenomenal. And so it was there.
For those that don't know, that's the ADF symbol, essentially. It's
Yeah,
the rising
yeah.
sun. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you
Yeah.
check my Facebook out on day 6, you'll see the image, the photos that I took that day. It was just phenomenal. And anyway, so Aidan then got me. He sets the scene, and that was actually where Jack Knox had sort of taken, because he was known as the cartographer who did the mapping, and he actually saved a number of Australian troops because he took them around enemy line. And so he said, this is where your great grandfather, he ran there. So it was like, oh my God, it was just phenomenal to hear that story. And then he gave me this poem to read, and it was called WX Unknown. And so wherever Australian troops were recruited from, if it was they came from Western Australia. Yep. So it was called WX Unknown. And anyway, I read this poem, and I couldn't even get a third of the way through it before the tears had started to flow. And because it just reminded me of my son, Jack, who was 18 at home in Melbourne. And I'm reading about this unknown soldier who was probably the same age as my son, Jack.
Yeah, right.
And it was written. So anyway, I started crying, and this young boy who was trekking with his dad, he was 14, he ended up finishing the poem for me. Anyway, where I'm going with this, it was this trek, and I'd only walked about 3 or 4 kilometers. Then for some reason I stopped, and I took a photo of the sun that was gleaming, and I just took that photo. Then I kept going, and no other photos were taken for another 4 or 5 hours. And it wasn't until I was on the plane trip home, I was looking through my photos, like, oh my God. So this photo was of a tree where all this moss was. And in the image in the tree was this cross. And it looked like the cross that our soldiers, when they'd won the what do they call it? The cross, the Southern Cross.
Yeah.
Yep. Medal. It looked like that was in the tree. And that poem said that rugged little cross, it was where the trees are draped in moss. The remains of a hero under it lay. And that was the poem that I was reading. And in that image that I took this photo, and an hour and a bit after I'd read the poem, for some reason I just took this photo, and it was there. So all this freaky spiritual stuff just happens, and it's like you have to embrace that. And I showed Aiden, he's like, oh my God, that's just phenomenal. And you would never be able to go back and find that tree, because a lot of the trees were very similar. But there's been human remains that still continue to be found as long as 5 or 6 years ago. And yeah, so I don't know, it's one of those things you have to go in with an open mind and heart, and going in there knowing that you want to walk in the footsteps, like I keep saying, of those who gave their freedom for our freedom. So it was just, yeah, that was day 6 was just phenomenal. And I think that's pretty much what got me through that 21 days of trekking. The 21 kilometers of trekking, because the last part of that trek, the last 5 kilometers, was going up what they call the 7 peaks. And it just poured down with rain that time. And it just took 3 to 4 hours to walk the last kilometer, because you're slipping and you're walking, you're slipping and you're walking. And it's like, okay, I'm going to keep going. You just keep going. And it's one foot instead in front of the other.
Yeah. And it's like words can't even describe it, right? Like even yourself, right now you're finding it hard to just like try and give as much of a representation of what you went through. And I've read some of the books that Dad used to read about not only Gallipoli but definitely Kokoda and stuff like that. And it's incredible to like the words coming off the paper at you can like hit you in the feels, but you still know in your own head that it's like, man, if I actually had to live through this, and you put your experience as a traveler or a tourist, wanting to just be present and enjoy the experience, right, and learn from it and see what they went through. You have to remember at the end of the day, these men, women, whatever, were walking under gunfire. right? They were staying encamped on hillsides for days on end. Like I remember Dad used to telling me like stories, because I think there was only like 3, maybe 4 times, and I'm sure Gwen would attest to this as well, that my grandfather actually would open up. Like, and I think
Yeah.
dad had only
Yeah.
ever heard a war story like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's one of those things where like war is an experience that people just don't want to share, because they see some horrific stuff. And when you can have the experience of, oh, I've been through a tough life, and I've had struggles and stuff like that, you put someone through something like Kokoda, like they'll come out the
Yeah.
other end and just be like, I've had it easy. Like I
Yeah.
don't even know what hard
Yeah.
is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and I think that's like, I suppose probably leading on, like, what are some of your biggest takeaways from going on this experience? Like, how do you think it's affected you going forward as a, in your day-to-day life now? Like, you probably rock up. I'm assuming you probably rock up to F45 now, and you're like, this is fucking nothing. Like, I got nothing to whinge about, like,
I know it is true. And actually, when I came back, I found going to F45, my lung capacity was just through the roof. Like it just, I was barely raising a sweat.
Yeah, you're like, give me more, bring it
Give
on,
me
let's
more.
go.
When's the next class happening?
Yeah, I need to do hill sprints. Where's the hills around? Let's go.
Yeah. But what it made me realize is that you still have the ability to be able to push through, and that's what I sort of found. And even catching up with a few of my former Hockey-roo mates, that I'd won Olympic gold with, they're like, oh my God, no, we can't believe you did it. And I'm like, yeah, come back and do it with me again. And they're like, oh my God. I said, you know what, the human's ability to be able to push through is just, you can do it. And I think we spoke off prior to us having a chat on air, was that, going back to David Goggins, who often says we as human beings, like if you look at us as a car, we sit on 80 kilometers, and because the rules are of the road, it's 80 kilometers, 90 kilometers, 100 kilometers. And so we sit within a range of being told what we can do for the obvious reasons. But in actual fact, the car can go 220 kilometers an hour. So, I mean, I'm just using that as an analogy in terms of, until we push the barriers, you don't realize how much we can get out of ourselves. So just when you think you can't, you actually can. And that might not be a good analogy to use, but David Goggins sort of uses it. I thought, that's sort of, we always sort of sit in our comfort zone, and people always just happy to sit in a comfort zone as opposed to being able to get out. And
people don't like challenge, right? They don't appreciate change. But when they do get past the challenge, they're like, oh, that was like pretty hectic, but I got through it. And then and my coach said it brilliantly last year. I think he did a live on it or whatever, and he's like, the greatest thing about hitting a personal best in the gym is you think, what's my next fucking personal best? Right?
Yeah,
like you just start becoming addicted to challenge, and like, what can I do next? Like, what can I, I think that's a really powerful message. Is it's like, you just have no idea what you're capable of. I don't know what I'm capable of, right? And like, I've been training for 8 to 10 years now since doing my weight loss, and I still find new shit that I can do. Like, I'm now playing footy at a level that's probably, I used to think that running 5K was good in a night of footy training. Like, I'm pumping out 7 to 8K some nights now, and it's at pace, and it's, you're cooked at the end of it, but God, you feel freaking good when you're like, that was challenging, but I had a crack at it and I got through it, right? Or I found a way to get through it. Like, you start to find ways to succeed instead of going, no, I'm a failure. No, I'm going to stop. No, I'm going to quit. No, I'm going to, and again, the hunger is there, you get through, like, and that's why I start all of my clients with, like, I just need you to show up to this week. Like, don't worry about getting your food right. Don't worry about hitting the perfect rep. Like, just get here.
Yeah.
I think it always comes full circle back to that. And it's like, for you, I think your greatest message to everyone is like, cool. Like, you want to experience Kokoda? Just go and do it. Like, just go and
Yeah.
like be present. Leave the phone at home. Take a camera so you're just taking photos, right? Like,
Yeah.
share those memories and stuff. But then share your thoughts and think about your thoughts and be present with your thoughts. And I think that's a really good thing. It's like, it's why journaling is so powerful, right? Like, I've used it with a couple of my clients that have got like severe anxiety, depression, and they're always down in the dumps. They don't know what a good day feels like. Excuse me. And like, you start to just show them ways to understand, like, this is what a good day feels like, right? And it's like, you look at your Kokoda Trek and it's like, you were cooking yourself every day, like within inches of like your legs falling off potentially, like you didn't know what was going to happen the next day when you went up that next hill. You're like, well, the knee could cave in today because I'm old and I'm this and I'm bloody, I'm a female and I'm not a male or whatever. Like, all these thoughts can potentially pull you back, but you're like, cool, let's just see what happens. Like, you see it as a challenge and you're like, cool, I'm just going to fucking get through today. And then at the end of today, I'm going to write something down that's going to be like, holy shit, 21 Ks was hard, or that 5 Ks feel hard or didn't look hard, but because it was raining, my God, still another challenge and I got through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. And it's and also being appreciative of the like the Papua New Guinean people that support us along the track, and they cook for us and support us and help us, and that's a means of employment for them. So it's just it's a full circle. There's so much to learn in life, and I think we only know what we know in life. You only know what you know today until you get more information that makes our our worldly view a lot more. And so I'm sort of just glad that I had that experience and couldn't embrace it the way that I did, as hard as it was, but to be able to share the stories as well.
To put it in martial arts terms, as soon as you got back, did you still feel like a white belt again? Because you're like, I've learned a lot about myself in this last 10 days.
Whatever. It was like, okay, I'm gone now, back up there. And I was even talking about, doing it again within 2 to 3 weeks after.
Yes. Block my schedule out. We're doing it again. Let's go.
Do it again. But that's and for me to journal it the way I sort of did, and the amount of people that had commented and said, oh, you took me on a journey and my grandfather was there, or great grandfather. And because, like I said, it's not a cheap thing to be able to go and do it, and you've got to prepare and train and put yourself, so there's a lot of things that you have to overcome to actually even get there. So I was really happy that I was able to share my experiences, and for those who would have loved to, they couldn't. So I sort of took them on a journey as well. So
it's another form of investing in yourself, right? Like, people can always make more money, but when you can invest in something that you can keep for life, like, you can't put a price on that. Like, there was an initial cost to get there and do it and take part, but the value of what you've taken away from this, like, man, we could probably talk for another 6 hours, like, and there'd be like little snippets, and you'd be like, oh yeah, and then there was this one time where I walked past this tree and this bird did this thing, and I was like, taken away, and whatever it might be, but there's so many little snippets of value. And I think that's a really cool thing, is like, when we do get challenged, like, have a look back at that challenge and see how you did overcome it. Like, learning how to do a deadlift in the gym, I'm like, how did you overcome that? And sometimes I've yelled at my clients, going, you just need to get a bit of mongrel about you. You're in control of the bar. Like, grab hold of it, rip it off the floor. And like, sometimes they'll come in and they go, you know what? Like, it wasn't the fact that I was like perfect technique or anything like that. I use that mentality of like, I'm in control. This is my moment. Go. And it was just like, you take on the challenge. But then if they have failed it, they also go, you know what? I did go home and I thought about it, and my shoulders weren't tight, or I didn't push the floor, or I didn't whatever. And so you can use that reflection in moments of challenge. And I'm sure there were probably times along the track that you were just like, man, I probably could have done that extra K of walking, or I probably could have adjusted my food a bit earlier, or and you're always going to have those moments, right?
Yeah. But I sort of think too, and think back to the sporting days. Sometimes when we reach the destination, you forget the journey, and that is the most valuable thing in life is the journey, what took you there. And that's why it's important to write shit down in your diary for when you have the good days or the bad days, and you can sort of look back and think the why. So yeah, so I sort of think,
sorry, do you find, like, after going through such a challenging experience, which was literally just challenge after challenge, like, because every day it would have just been one after the other, like, oh God, what's next, right? Like, do you find now that, like, your mindset is just that much more unbreakable or unshakable, or however you want to see it, when just like a normal everyday challenge comes up now? So, like, if you're having, you know, the kids are finding they're struggling with something, and you can always, you've probably got that little $2 story in your back pocket where you're like, well, when I was up on that fucking hill, this kind of thought went through my head, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you're right, like, it's not that big of an issue, or I could approach it a better way, or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes, I don't know, it's hard because, like, I do a lot of public speaking, and my messages are sort of always the same, you know, like, I have gratitude for the opportunities that I've had, but I've fucking worked hard to put myself in front of these opportunities. So I found, you know, having empathy and understanding for those that have gone before me, but also there are people that, you know, may not ever be able to be in front of opportunities that I've sort of worked hard for. So I sort of feel that I have a real understanding of what's around me, you know, and that's why I sort of feel that my story is important, because, you know, the history of, you know, my Aboriginal heritage sort of thing, mum growing up in the mission, me growing up in housing commission, but the two things that I could do was have access to education and access to playing sports. And they're the two freedoms that I had that my mum didn't have, my nana didn't have. So that's what I often always tell kids, the opportunity to play sports and have education. And sports is fundamental, I sort of feel, for anyone, any sort of sports, because it teaches you your rules and your respectfulness and your environment that you're in. And to win, to lose, how do you cope when you win? How do you cope when you lose? And all these things. So they're good things to have. And so not everyone can get right up here, but it depends on the mountain that you're looking at climbing as an individual, you know. And the mountain to climb is just one foot in front of the other, and it's just being able to remember the journey, you know, not just always about the destination, because it's the journey that teaches you a lot of the fundamentals, which you can use then as a resource to when you aren't having a good day, or you win, you lose, whatever, you can just draw on, you know, from your own sort of experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's a massive thing. Like, you can draw from those past experiences, like you said, and sometimes it's just that 2-second, like, have a breather. You remember that one time you had that struggle and you got through it, and, you know, how is this any different? Well, actually, yeah, no, that's a good point. You know, like, and you remind yourself. We're always reminding ourselves, you know, like, it's and I think that's really cool. Well, that has been fantastic. Before we go, is there anything else you feel you'd love to share about your experience on Kokoda? Like I said, I know we could speak for another 6 hours. I'm like blown away with the stuff you've been able to share today. So I do say a massive thank you and appreciation. But is there anything else you'd like to share in closing?
I guess when I got to Owen's Corner and I sat there and I'd gotten up there and I went through the arches, it even wasn't a sense of relief. And, you know, the group, they'd sort of gotten there before me, because I just wanted to take my time. And when I got there, I was actually sad that the experience that I'd had had come to an end. even as hard as it was, but I sort of, it wasn't like a joyous momentous, it was more of a real somber sort of feeling. And then finish it off by going to the graveyard there, and you're sort of walking around the graveyard, and there was so many markings of the unknown soldier. And you sort of, and that goes sort of back to what we're sort of saying is the experience that I had, which the grandeur of it was so big, and the fact that you could push yourself to sort of get through. There's always someone that's had it harder than you. And that was the message that I took from that is, you know, obviously the lives that were lost. And so for me, that was, irrespective of most things I always do, I try and stay as humble as you can, you know, because it's, there's so much to do in life. You know, and I just sort of feel if my journey has been an inspiration for others to be able to keep pushing themselves, but I'm always learning on ways to further better myself, or to do better, to give better, to be a better person. I don't know. You can never stop learning in life, and that's what I sort of found. You know, I'm 52 next week, and that's not a barrier for me to just say, oh my God, I'm 52. What should a 52-year-old be doing? I'm like, no, I'm doing all this other stuff. I'm want to do Kokoda again. I'd love to do Mount Kilimanjaro one day, and just things, and just my foundation work that I want to do. It's, you know, enhancing the lives of other people who, you know, like I said, will probably never be able to have a life that I've had, or the freedoms aren't there. And so
it's exciting to be able to ask the question every day, what's next, right?
Yeah,
instead of going, I'm done. It's such a different,
Well, yeah, because even like I found when I won my Olympic gold medal in hockey, so that was in 1996. I had not seen the replay of that game until 20 years later.
Is that right?
I didn't watch. I had an interview with Bruce McIlvaney.
Yeah.
He said to me, because it was going into the Rio Olympics 2016, he goes, so Nova, how many times have you seen the replay of you winning? And I was like, how about 0? He's like, no way.
That's
and
insane.
I said, fair income. I'd never watched it. So it was like, you climb the top of that mountain, see the view. It's like, okay, where's the next mountain?
Yeah, right.
And so I sort of found that, you know, I've always set myself a goal, you achieve it, and then it's on to the next, it's on to the next, it's on to the next.
Not resting on your laurels, so to speak. Yeah,
it's not resting on your laurels, but I think I'm also triggered by and this is important for your clients as well, is to celebrate the small victories along the way. And that's something that I'm not really good at.
Because you're always looking for your next victory. Yeah,
and that's important to actually, and actually, if there's an analogy of that on doing Kokoda, I'd start there was one morning I got up, and Wagi and John was like, see that thing where the mountain, there's a big gap. We're going there today. I said, oh my God, get out of here. They said, yep, we're going there today. That wasn't even halfway. That was a third of the way. So and I was like, oh, so you walked all that way, 4 hours to get to that one point, and we still had it. That was a third of the way. But my point is that sometimes to see where you're going seems so far until you get there and you think, that's only a third of the way, and you just got to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get to the destination. But when I got to that place, I could look back and think, that is where I've come from. And I think that could be a message for your clients to say, celebrate the small victories, but it's good to sit back and reflect on how far you've come.
Yeah, always. And that, to put it in terms of my story, I never used to use my weight loss journey as inspiration for people. And people are like, how the hell, like, you're a coach, like that doesn't make any sense, like you're spinning bullshit. And I said, no, like I had a set of skills that then, I'd learned how to train people, how to, teach them how to lose weight, how to eat better and all that sort of stuff. So I had the tool belt, but my most powerful tool was actually my story. Yet I felt like I was being egotistical. I felt like I was, I've done it, so don't worry about it. That's in the past. So don't worry about it. Right. So I'd kind of put it away in a safe and was just like, I know that I did it, but I don't feel I have to tell anyone else about it. And a lot of people just were like, that doesn't make any sense. And for me, I did obviously some life coaching a couple of years back, and a very good mate of mine, Cam, actually reminded me many times. He's like, bro, your powerful story is so good, because just the words coming out of your mouth of like explaining what day one was like in the gym at 180 kilos, and like nearly passing out on the treadmill and people rushing over to help you. And then you sat in the car and you had that realization that, well, I'm not dead. Let's see if I can do it again tomorrow. That was what went through my head. And when I actually share that with people now, like, it just blows people away. And they're like, oh, it is possible. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm telling you this. And I think, like you said, when you can just have that reflection and, have a takeaway and like, cool, what did I learn today? And it's like, what did I learn? Well, because I had that victory, I now know that yada, 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 can happen. It's I think that is very powerful. Always make sure you know where you've come from. But also be prepared to use it as a story, not to boast and, big note yourself, but to just tell people that like hard shit is going to happen, like whether you like it or not. You've just got to find a way within yourself to go, cool, how do I take this on? How do I learn from this? If I do fail at this, all right, fuck, what did I learn? Yeah. That's cool, man.
No, very true. Very true.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that has been fantastic. That episode has blown me away. I have wanted to talk about this for ages, ever since I've obviously met you, and then obviously finding out that you were going to do Kokoda last year. I was like, man, that's really cool. I will do it. It is on my list of things to do, so don't worry. You will see me doing it. You heard it here first. It's now online. So, like, if I ever say I'm not doing it, we can always come back to this. That's cool. But yeah, so again, Nova, thank you very much for sharing your story. I've had an absolute blast. I know we've gone way over time. I couldn't give a shit. It's really cool stuff. And I'm sure the guys out there and girls listening are going to absolutely love this as well. So thank you. Massive appreciation and gratitude for your time today. I know you are a busy woman. And that's all from us, guys. And I'll chuck links to Nova's page as well, so you can go and check out her blog post that she did. I think those are very good to read through as well if you're having a shit day, for sure. All righty. And we'll speak with you soon, man. Have a lovely day, and catch the next episode, guys. Peace.
Pleasure. See you later. Bye.